Emma Rodriguez's life had become a monotonous routine. Each day was a blur into the next: quiet walks through her garden, the occasional visit to the market. At 70 years old, she lived alone in a modest bungalow on the outskirts of Willow Creek, a picturesque town tucked away in rolling hills. Her husband, Miguel, had passed away 5 years earlier, leaving her with only memories and the sound of an empty house. But everything changed the day Emma met Rex. It was a cloudy morning when Emma decided to visit the Willow Creek Animal Shelter. She hadn't planned on adopting a dog. The pain of loss still weighed heavily on her, but something inside her urged her to go. As she wandered the rows of kennels, she paused in front of a large enclosure. Inside was Rex, a retired police dog with a gray speckled muzzle and a limp in his hind leg. His piercing eyes told 1,000 untold stories. "That's Rex," the shelter volunteer said, a young woman named Laura. "He's a retired K-9 officer. Got injured in the line of duty. Well, let's just say he's not an easy dog." Emma crouched down, her eyes meeting Rex's. "Not easy?" she asked. Laura hesitated. "He's been through a lot. He doesn't trust people easily, and most folks are scared off by his demeanor. But he's loyal to a fault. He just needs someone patient." Emma's gaze didn't waver. "I'll take him." The drive home was uneventful, save for the occasional wary glance from Rex in the back seat. Pulling up to Emma's small bungalow, he hesitated before stepping out of the car. Emma gave him space, allowing him to explore the garden at his own pace. She watched as he sniffed the air, his movements careful but deliberate. "This is your home now," she said softly. Rex didn't answer, of course, but his ears flickered at her voice. It was a small thing, but it gave Emma hope. The first few weeks were difficult. Rex's wariness was low-key, head flinch at sudden movements, avoid eye contact, and growl softly when approached too quickly. Emma had the patience of a nurse, learned over the years, who knew the value of quiet persistence. She spent hours sitting near him, reading aloud from her favorite books or humming old songs her husband used to love. Slowly but surely, Rex began to thaw. One evening, as Emma sat on the porch watching the sunset, Rex approached her and rested his head on her lap. The gesture was so unexpected that tears sprang to her eyes. "You're a good boy," she whispered, stroking his fur. "We're going to be okay." And day after day, they became more attached. Rex followed Emma wherever she went, whether on an errand or while guarding her on evening walks. Years of police work hadn't dulled his protective instincts. He would station himself between Emma and anything he perceived as a threat, including a squirrel that happened to scamper across their path. Yet his past wasn't behind Rex just yet. One afternoon, Emma was out shopping at the local market when a commotion broke out near the parking lot. A man, young, disheveled, and clearly agitated, was arguing with a vendor. The man's voice grew louder, his gestures more erratic. Emma clutched her basket of vegetables, feeling a pang of unease. Before she could respond, Rex sprang into action. He stepped in front of Emma, his muscles taut, his growl low but unmistakable. The man froze, his eyes locking onto the imposing dog. For a moment, the whole market held its breath. "Easy, boy," Emma whispered, placing a hand on Rex's back. To the man, she added, "You should leave now." The man hesitated, then muttered something under his breath and walked away. The tension in the air dissipated, and the other shoppers began murmuring among themselves. "That's some dog you've got there," said the vendor, a burly man with a kind smile. "Looks like he's still got some of that police training in him." Emma smiled, patting Rex's head. "He's more than just a dog. He's family." That evening, as they sat together in the living room, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that Rex's instincts had saved her from something far worse. She looked at him, his eyes steady and calm, and felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you, Rex," she said softly. "For everything." The little swish of his tail was slight, yet it spoke volumes. For the first time in years, Emma felt safe. She felt whole. Little did she know, Rex's protective instincts would soon be put to the ultimate test. And what he would do next would change not only Emma's life but would touch the hearts of the whole town. The peace that had descended upon Emma and REX's lives was short-lived. As days wore on, Emma started to notice strange happenings. It began with minor, apparently irrelevant incidents: a street lamp flickering outside her bungalow, the soft sound of footsteps when she went on her evening walks, and the way REX's hackles would rise at odd moments. One evening, while cleaning up after dinner, Emma had Rex let out a sudden, sharp bark that dropped the plate from her hand. The clatter of the porcelain reached her ears, buried beneath REX's growls as he stood rigidly by the living room window, staring at something outside. Emma approached cautiously, her heart racing. She peered out into the darkness but saw nothing. Still, Rex remained on edge, his growls low and persistent. "What is it, boy?" Emma whispered, placing a reassuring hand on his back. But Rex didn't relax. Instead, he moved to the front door and stood there, his ears pricked up, waiting. The next morning, Emma found a note tucked under her doormat. The paper was damp from the morning dew, the handwriting jagged and rushed. "You shouldn't have been there." Emma's hands shook as she read the words. Her mind ran back to the incident at the market. Could this be connected? She looked over at Rex, who watched her closely, as if sensing her unease. "It's nothing," she said out loud, trying to convince herself as much as the dog. But deep down, she knew better. Emma decided to report the note to the local police. Officer Jim Carter, a kind but overworked man in his 40s, listened patiently while she explained everything: the incident at the market, the note, REX's strange behavior. "It's probably just some punk trying to scare you," Jim said, though his tone was less than convincing. "Still, I'll send a patrol car by your place for the next few nights, just in case." Emma nodded, but the reassurance did little to ease her mind. As she drove home, she kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following her. That night, the rain came in torrents, wind howling through the trees. Emma sat in her living room, knitting by the fire. Rex lay at her feet. The house was cold despite the warmth of the flames, the storm inside its walls, or so it seemed. Around midnight, a loud crash sent Emma out of her chair. Rex was standing in an instant, furiously barking. Emma grabbed a flashlight and crept toward the source of the noise. Her heart pounded as she opened the door to the kitchen. The back window was broken, shards of glass lying scattered on the floor. The curtains were billowing with wind, and rain splattered the tiles. What really sent a shiver down Emma's spine was a trail of muddy footprints from the window toward the hall. "Oh my God," she whispered, backing away. Before she could react further, Rex bolted past her, his growls echoing in the house. Emma followed, clutching the flashlight tightly. She found him in the hallway, standing at the door to the basement. His growls had turned into ferocious barks, his body pressed against the door, as if trying to break it down. Emma's hands were shaking as she reached for her phone. She dialed 911, trying to speak, but the words shook. "Someone's in my house," she whispered. "Please hurry." The minutes dragged on like hours as Emma waited for the police. Rex never left his position by the basement door, his growls growing louder with each passing moment. When the sound of sirens finally broke through the storm, Emma felt a wave of relief. Officer Carter and 2 other policemen arrived, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they searched the house. Emma stayed in the living room, clutching Rex's collar to keep him from charging after the officers. "Clear upstairs," one of them called. "Basement's locked from the inside," another said. "We'll have to break it open." Emma's stomach churned as she listened to the sounds of the officers forcing the door. A moment later there was a shout, followed by a scuffle. Rex barked wildly, straining against Emma's grip. "We got him," Officer Carter's voice called up. "Stay put, ma'am." The man they pulled from the basement was the same one Emma had seen at the market. His clothes were soaked, his face pale and twisted with anger. As the officers hauled him away, he glared at Emma. "This isn't over," he spat, his voice venomous. Emma's knees felt weak, but Rex pressed against her side, his steady presence grounding her. Officer Carter approached, his expression grim. "Looks like he's been stalking you for a while," he said. "We found a stash of photos in the basement." Pictures of you around town, at the market, even here at your house. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. Why? She managed to ask. He's got a history of harassment and burglary, Carter replied. You were probably just unlucky enough to catch his attention. But thanks to Rex, you're safe now. She looked down at the dog, who was finally beginning to relax. Tears filled her eyes as she knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around his neck. You saved me, she whispered. Again. Rex licked her cheek, his tail wagging slightly. In that moment, Emma knew she had made the right decision in bringing him into her life. But the ordeal wasn't over. The man's parting words lingered in Emma's mind, a dark cloud over her newfound sense of safety. She would soon learn that Rex's unwavering loyalty and courage would be tested in ways she could never have imagined. The days that followed the intruder's arrest were almost a blur for Emma. Her mind was still filled with the man's chilling last words, "This isn't over." The reassurances by Officer Carter could not erase the seed of dread that had taken root so deep inside her. Rex, too, seemed more watchful than ever. His routine patrols around the house were longer. At each and every small noise, the growling was more often. Rarely did he leave Emma's side, during the day, placing himself between her and the front door, at night, a guard at the foot of her bed. He seemed to know that real danger was far from over. One afternoon, Emma was working in her garden when Rex's barking startled her. He was at the fence, taut and teeth bared, barking at something beyond the trees. Emma joined him and scanned the area but saw nothing out of the ordinary. It's probably just a deer, she said, though her voice wasn't as sure. Rex didn't move. He continued to bark, his ears laid back and his eyes fixed on the tree line. Emma laid a reassuring hand on his back, but the tension in his body didn't ease. That night, Emma double-checked the locks on all her doors and windows before she went to bed. Rex lay by the door, his ears twitching at every sound. Her sleep was fitful, filled with dreams of shadows dancing through her house, unseen eyes watching her from the darkness. The next morning, Emma found something on her porch that made her heart shudder. A single rose, its petals bright red against the gray wood, lay there. There was no note, no explanation. She picked it up, her hands trembling as her mind ran wildly. Who would leave this? She whispered to herself. The poor pup had sniffed at the rose, then growled low, and his tail was stiff. Emma got it inside in one sweep onto the kitchen counter and continued brooding. Was that some kind of apology by the intruder? Threat? Warning? She dialed the number of Officer Carter immediately, who came by in less than an hour. He took a view of the rose and turned really grim. It could be nothing, he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. But given everything that's happened, well, treat it seriously. They'll have a patrol car stationed outside your house for the next few nights. Emma nodded, her gratitude tempered by fear. Thank you, Officer Carter. I can't shake the feeling that someone's still watching me. Carter placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We'll catch them. Whoever it is, they won't get away with this. That evening, as Emma prepared dinner, Rex began pacing the house. He moved from room to room, his nose to the ground and his ears perked. Emma watched him closely, her own anxiety mounting. What is it, boy? She asked, but Rex didn't answer. He merely stopped by the window in the living room and growled, staring out into the street. Emma peered out through the curtains. A black car was parked across the street, its engine idling. She couldn't see the driver through the tinted windows, but the sight of the vehicle sent a chill through her. Could just be someone visiting a neighbor, she said aloud, though her voice shook. Rex's growling deepened, his body tense. Emma decided to call Officer Carter again. By the time he arrived, the car was gone, leaving only the faint smell of exhaust in its wake. It might not mean anything, Carter said, peering around. But you did the right thing calling me. If you see it again, let me know immediately. As days turned into a week, Emma's sense of unease grew. She began noticing more strange occurrences, faint scratches on the back door, muffled footsteps in the distance during her evening walks, and the lingering feeling of being watched. Rex's behavior mirrored her anxiety. he became more protective, barking at every passerby and refusing to leave Emma's side. She found comfort in his presence, but she also worried about the toll the stress was taking on him. One night, as Emma was settling into bed, a loud crash shattered the silence. She bolted upright, her heart racing. Rex was already on his feet, barking furiously. "What now?" Emma whispered, tugging on her phone and running downstairs. She found the source of the noise in the kitchen. The back window was shattered, glass glittering on the floor. A brick lay amidst the shards, a piece of paper tied to it with string. Emma's hands shook as she untied the paper and unfolded it. Scrawled across the page in jagged letters were the words, "You should have left him alone." Rex growled low and deep, his body pressed against Emma's leg. She clutched the phone and dialed 911, trying to explain in a voice that shook. "Stay inside," the dispatcher instructed. "Officers are en route." When the police arrived, they thoroughly searched the property but found nothing. There was no intruder. Officer Carter's face was grim as he looked at the note. "Whoever this is, they're escalating," he said. "Well, increase patrols and install a temporary surveillance system around your house. But Emma, you need to be prepared. This might not stop here." Emma nodded, her jaw setting. "I'm not going anywhere," she said firmly. "This is my home. And Rex and I aren't going down without a fight." Carter gave her a small, admiring smile. "Good. We'll catch whoever's doing this. Just hang tight." That night, Emma sat in the living room with Rex by her side. The house was quiet, but the tension in the air was palpable. She reached down and stroked Rex's fur, drawing strength from his steady presence. "We'll get through this," she whispered. "Together." He looked up at her, his eyes bright with unyielding fidelity. Through all the fear and uncertainty, Emma found a spark of hope. She wasn't alone in this fight. And as long as Rex was by her side, she knew she had a chance. The nights that followed felt like the longest in Emma's life. The police patrols were regular, but they didn't still the growing tension. The surveillance cameras installed around her home brought some reassurance, but every time she checked the live feed, she couldn't get away from the thought that just beyond the field of vision, something or someone was waiting. Rex became more intense. He hardly slept, pacing the house like a restless guardian. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of wind, would twitch his ears. Emma tried to comfort him, but she knew he sensed something she couldn't. Then, on a stormy Friday night, everything came to a head. Emma sat in the living room, a cup of tea shaking in her hands. Rain lashed against the windows, and thunder growled in the distance. Rex sat at her feet, his body stiff and his eyes fixed on the front door. The house was silent except for the sound of the storm. At precisely midnight, Rex let out a growl so low it seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. Emma's heart leapt into her throat as she followed his gaze to the door. For a moment there was no sound. Then, a loud crash shattered the silence. The back door. Emma jumped to her feet, and she ran after Rex, who suddenly bolted for the kitchen. She picked up a baseball bat that she had kept beside the couch all this time and followed him, her heart racing. She reached the kitchen, her blood turned cold. The back door hung off its hinges, rain pouring in. Two figures, in darkly colored outfits, stood framed in the doorway, masks hiding their faces. One held a crowbar, the other a flashlight. "You shouldn't have called the cops," one sneered as he stepped inside. The growl grew deeper, and Rex put himself between Emma and intruders. The crowbar rose threateningly, and before he could get one step further, Rex lunged. His jaws clamped onto the man's arm. A weapon fell with a yelp from his mouth. "Get him off me!" he yelled, stumbling backward. The second intruder tried to swing the flashlight at Rex, but Emma acted on instinct. She swung the bat with all her strength, striking him in the side. He let out a grunt of pain and staggered, dropping the flashlight. Rex released the first man and turned his attention to the second, his growls echoing through the room. The sound of sirens in the distance coursed a fresh wave of hope through Emma's body. The intruders, too, had heard them, and now scrambled for retreat. The first man made his way out the door, his injured arm clutched to his side. The second wasn't as fortunate. Rex caught him by the leg, tugging him down to the ground. He shrieked, kicking and flailing with all his might to pry himself loose, but Rex held on. In a few moments, the police stormed into the house with their guns drawn. "Down, Rex," Emma ordered, trying to sound calm despite the fear building up inside her. After a moment of hesitation, Rex obeyed and let the man go before stepping back beside Emma. The officers quickly subdued the intruder, handcuffing him and dragging him outside. Officer Carter turned to Emma, his face a mixture of relief and concern. "Are you okay?" he asked, surveying the destroyed kitchen. Emma nodded, her hands shaking as she lowered the bat. "Thanks to Rex," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "He saved me." Carter looked at Rex, who was panting but alert, his eyes still scanning the room for threats. "You've got a real hero here," he said, kneeling to pat Rex on the head. "We'll take it from here. You're safe now." The events that followed after the attack were hazy. The intruders were from the same group as the man arrested weeks earlier, and their intention had been crystal clear: to intimidate Emma into silence. But thank goodness for Rex, their plot had gone terribly awry. News of Rex's heroism spread like wildfire through Willow Creek. The neighbors stopped by with treats and flowers, praising the dog who had saved Emma with his life. A front-page story ran in the local newspaper: "Retired K-9 saves widow in daring home invasion." Emma's bungalow became the sign of resilience, and Rex turned into some sort of town legend. The police department even granted him a medal for bravery that Emma proudly placed on the mantel. As the weeks passed, Emma and Rex fell back into routine. The house felt lighter now, as if the shadows that had loomed over it had finally lifted. She no longer felt the weight of fear constantly, and she knew she owed it all to Rex. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sun go down, Emma stroked Rex's fur and smiled. "You're not just my protector," she said softly. "You're my family." Rex wagged his tail, his eyes shining with loyalty and love. For the first time in years, Emma felt truly safe. She knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she and Rex would face them together. As the first twinkles began to dot the night sky, Emma would have had it no other way but as the very turn that loneliness and terror stopped trying their ways with her only if that fearless dog stood strong never to yield for her sake.